new details about the detention of Air Force Major Jason Watson. Watson is the active duty airman who was arrested last month after calling for President Trump's impeachment on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. Watson's attorney tells Outfront that he was detained yesterday at Joint Base Andrews by Air Force security. And Watson is now being held, he says, in a county jail. He'll face a judge tomorrow. Now, the detention happened after Watson explained on this program his reasons for speaking out despite this great personal and professional risk.
Nothing that is worth doing is something that you can do for free. Everything that is worthwhile is going to cost something. We just have to be willing to accept that we can change what is happening in our country if we're just willing to pay a price for it. So all that I could do was ask myself, what's the highest price that I'm willing to pay?
Out front now, Chris Mutimer, the attorney representing Major Jason Watson. And Chris, a lot to ask you about is see, what you really know at this point. I mean, what details are you able to tell us about how Major Watson was detained?
Hey guys, your friend John speaking. An active duty Air Force major stood outside the White House holding a sign reading, "Impeach, Convict, Remove," and was arrested on camera. The striking image of a uniformed officer protesting the commander-in-chief became an instant national story. This isn't some random guy who wandered off the street with a grudge and a piece of cardboard. This is a commissioned officer, a man who took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. A man who spent nearly 2 decades climbing the ranks of the United States Air Force. And he chose to stand in broad daylight, in his uniform, in front of the Capitol building, and publicly call for the removal of both President Trump and Vice President Vance from office. The reason? The Iran war. A conflict that has been stirring up controversy and constitutional questions since the very first shot was fired.
Sure. So, as you know, he was on your show Monday night. After your show, almost immediately after, he sent a communication to his chain of command, letting them know that he was reporting in, letting them know where he was going, and if there was any questions that they had or anything they needed from him, he was making himself available to them. He didn't hear anything that evening. I think we all expected that he might have been arrested that night, or he would be, but he wasn't. He reported to duty the next day. And while he was, this is on Tuesday, while he was at work, he, through counsel, informed his chain of command that he would no longer be wearing his uniform. Shortly after that, he was told he needed to put his uniform on within about 20 minutes. My understanding is around 3:30, he was then arrested and he was brought to a county jail. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so he's in a county jail. I know you did, have a chance to speak with Major Watson this afternoon. You know, what's the situation there in the county jail? How's he doing?
Now here's where it gets wild. Just weeks after that arrest, that same major is sitting in pretrial confinement, locked up, his freedom taken away. And all over the internet, millions of people are asking the exact same question. Is the military punishing this guy for exercising his right to speak his mind? Or did he actually cross a line that no service member should ever cross? Either way you slice it, this story is exploding right now, and it has dragged the entire impeachment conversation kicking and screaming back into the national spotlight. Let's rewind and set the scene properly, because the details here matter more than most people realize. This is Major Jason Watson. 17 years in the Air Force, a career that most people would never risk for anything. And back in July, he made a decision that would change everything.
He's doing well, and I think one thing he wants his family and his friends to know that he's okay. He expected this. He has said this, that he expected to be arrested. He sounds good. He sounds healthy. He is aware that tomorrow there's going to be a detention hearing. Right now, we are waiting on the government to turn over evidence for this detention hearing. We have not received, at least last I checked, I've not received any exhibits for this matter. We have a team that is waiting for this so we can start preparing for the hearing tomorrow. But it seems to me that the government is dragging his feet on putting everything together. We're not even aware of what he's charged with yet. It's pretty ridiculous if you ask me.
Well, so you're not even aware of what he's charged with. I mean, I guess, is that one of the reasons why you're saying the military's not been cooperative since his detention. I mean, I know he could face, and you said he's obviously knew what wants his friends and family to know. He expected this, but he could face court-martial, obviously dismissal from the Air Force, loss of pay, benefits, and incarceration in a military jail. These are all possibilities. Do you have a sense of what the punishment the military will seek is? And I guess that's the context of.
He showed up at a protest at the Capitol wearing his uniform, holding that sign, making his case to anyone who would listen. The protest was focused on the administration's handling of the Iran war, and Watson wasn't shy about his feelings. He believed, and he still believes, that the president was violating the Constitution in a way that demanded action. Not just words, not just tweets, action. And action is exactly what he took. He got arrested right there on the spot. And honestly, that alone would have been enough to make headlines. A military officer getting cuffed at a protest? That's a story. But what happened next is what turned this from a local news blip into a full-blown national firestorm. Watson sat down for his very first television interview. He chose CNN. He chose to go on national television and speak directly to the American people. And let me tell you, he did not hold back. He said Trump was flagrantly violating the Constitution. Those were his exact words.
But you still don't know what they're charging him with.
No, but I mean, based off of previous orders that have come from JAG, I would say we're expecting charges related to Article 88, which is contempt towards an officer, or Article 92, which is failure to obey, which would be related potentially to him not putting his uniform back on. He is facing significant jail time, possibly. He's facing discharge from the military. Depending how the government wants to stack charges or bring charges against him, we could be looking at serious jail time. And again, I just want to reiterate, he knows this. You know, he's been in the military for 17 years. Major Watson is someone who cares deeply about this country and this Constitution. And I think he said this on your show Monday, and I thought it was beautiful, is that he knows people right now are scared and they're worried. And they are in a situation where they don't know what's going to happen as a result of this administration. And he wants people to know that they're not alone. And for people who may ask, why did he take his uniform off, or why is he not willing to take it? You know, I can't speak for Major Watson, but what I can say is,
he said he hoped his protest, his arrest, his willingness to throw his entire career into the fire would inspire other Americans to actually do something, instead of just sitting at home complaining on social media. Now, here's the thing about that interview. It aired on a Sunday night into Monday morning. Millions of people saw it. Millions of people heard what he had to say. And then something happened that made everyone's jaw drop. The very next day, the Air Force placed Major Watson into pretrial confinement, locked him up before any trial had even happened, before any formal charges had even been filed. They cited probable cause for what they called continued misconduct.
He has a deep, deep respect for that uniform, and he definitely has made it clear that he did not take an act and go out and protest and ask for an impeachment of the president, hoping other people would copy him. He is taking an action because he believes someone needs to do that, and he doesn't want anyone else in the military to have to do that. He knows this may have offended people, people who are currently serving or who may serve, but I believe that what you saw when someone, you know, if there's a reason why he might not wear that uniform, it's because he wants to show a commitment to that uniform and respect for it.
Major Watson, obviously, you have done this after incredible consideration. You've been in the Air Force for 17 years. You're in the Air Force. And you know that by choosing to speak out as you did in uniform, calling for the commander-in-chief's impeachment and removal from office, that carries grave consequences, violates the laws governing the U.S. military. But you chose to do it, knowing all of that. Tell me why.
But the timing was so perfect, so convenient, that people across the political spectrum started connecting the dots. You have to understand what pretrial confinement actually means in the military. It's not something that happens automatically. It's not like they just throw every service member under investigation into a cell and figure it out later. There's supposed to be a process. A commander has to determine there's probable cause that an offense occurred. There typically has to be some finding that the person is either a flight risk, likely to obstruct the investigation, or likely to engage in further serious misconduct if left free. So the Air Force is making a very specific claim here. They're not just saying they don't like what he said. They're pointing to allegations of continued misconduct, which suggests, at least according to their framing, that this isn't only about the CNN interview itself, but about a pattern of behavior they believe has kept happening. But here's the million-dollar question that nobody can seem to answer with certainty. Is that framing accurate, or is it a convenient justification layered on top of what's really a retaliation move? Honestly, we don't fully know yet, and neither does anybody shouting about this online. That's exactly why the not yet formally charged detail matters so much. Until charges are filed, until we can actually see what specific conduct they're pointing to, this whole thing sits in a gray zone where reasonable people can look at the same facts and land in very different places. What we do know is this. Watson's lawyer has said he expects possible allegations under Articles 88 and 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Article 88 deals with contempt toward officials, basically using contemptuous words against people like the president or other top government officials while serving as a commissioned officer. Article 92 deals with failing to obey a lawful order or violating a regulation. These are real established parts of military law that have existed for a long time. They predate this administration, they predate the Iran war, they've been on the books for decades. Service members do not have the exact same free speech protections that civilians have. That's a hard truth that a lot of people don't want to hear, especially when they're in uniform, especially when it comes to public criticism of their chain of command all the way up to the commander-in-chief. That is just a fact about how the military justice system works. It was true long before Trump took office. It was true before the Iran conflict started. It was true before any of this current mess even existed in anyone's imagination. But here's the twist that makes this story so complicated and honestly so fascinating. This military discipline process is completely separate from the actual congressional impeachment process. Totally different systems. A court-martial proceeding under Articles 88 and 92 has zero connection to the House of Representatives voting to impeach a sitting president. Zero. These are two different tracks running in parallel. And a lot of the confusion online right now is coming from people mixing those two things together like they're the same story. They are not. One is about whether an active duty officer violated military conduct rules by publicly criticizing his commander-in-chief. The other is about whether Congress has the votes to actually remove a president from office. Very, very different things. And that brings us to the political reality that nobody seems to want to talk about. The actual mechanics of impeachment. Because let's be honest, the impeachment process itself only requires a simple majority vote in the House of Representatives. That part is honestly not that hard if the votes are there. But removal from office, actually kicking a president out, requires a 2/3 vote in the Senate. 2/3. That is an enormous number, a genuinely massive bar to clear. And it has almost never happened in American history for any president ever. So even in a scenario where the House did move forward with impeachment, actually removing Trump from office would require a level of bipartisan Senate support that right now simply is not there. Current reporting describes Democrats discussing accountability and impeachment as something they might pursue in the future, especially if they retake Congress, not as an active vote happening right now, not as something scheduled on the calendar this week or even this year. That distinction matters a lot, and it's exactly the kind of nuance that gets completely lost when a story like this goes viral. Let's talk for a second about why the Iran war specifically is what's driving all of this, because that context really matters. Watson didn't hold up a generic impeach Trump sign. He held up a sign tied directly to Trump and Vance's handling of the Iran war. That tells you something important. This is not some vague, all-purpose protest against the administration in general. This is a very specific, very pointed accusation about how the president is using military force and whether Congress ever actually signed off on it. That question, did Congress authorize this war, or is the executive branch acting on its own here, is a real serious constitutional question that goes back decades. Way before Trump, way before Watson, all the way back to debates about the War Powers Act and how much authority a president actually has to commit troops without a formal congressional declaration. Watson, as an officer who might actually be ordered to participate in operations tied to that war, has a very personal, very direct stake in that question. That's part of what makes his protest hit so much harder than some random civilian holding a sign. He's not just commenting on policy from the outside, he is potentially the guy who has to carry out the orders that come from that policy. And that's exactly why this story is so much more interesting as a human story than as a straight political story. Because honestly, the politics of impeachment right now are basically stuck. Everybody knows the numbers. Everybody knows the Senate math. What's actually moving, what's actually generating headlines and emotion and attention is this one guy putting his own career, his own freedom, everything on the line to make a public statement. That is what's driving this story forward right now, not some secret vote count happening behind closed doors in Washington. And before we move any further into the breakdown, it's worth pointing out that this story is not coming from just one outlet with one angle. CNN did the original interview with Watson himself. The Hill separately confirmed his detention following the Capitol protest and the renewed impeachment call. MSNBC has been covering the broader question of whether Democrats would actually pursue impeachment if they retake control of Congress down the road. When multiple independent outlets are all reporting the same core facts, the protest, the arrest, the interview, the confinement, that tells you this is a real developing story, not some rumor spinning out of control on social media. Now, let's get into what Watson actually said during that CNN interview, because the words he chose are crucial. He didn't just say he disagreed with the president's policies. He said Trump was flagrantly violating the Constitution. That's a heavy accusation coming from anyone. But coming from a sitting military officer, it carries a different weight entirely. He went on to say that he hoped his actions would inspire other Americans to take action too, instead of just watching from the sidelines. That part of the interview is what really seemed to get under the skin of military leadership. It wasn't just criticism, it was a call to action, a direct appeal to other Americans to follow his lead and do something. And just one day after that interview aired, the Air Force made their move. Pre-trial confinement. Locked up. No formal charges filed yet. The timing is almost too perfect, which is exactly why people are losing their minds over it online right now. You have to understand the psychological impact of that timing. Watson went on national television and publicly humiliated the administration in a way that few military officers have ever dared to do. He called out the commander-in-chief by name. He laid out specific constitutional violations as he saw them. He made a compelling case to the American people. And within 24 hours, he was sitting in a cell. Now look, it's entirely possible that the investigation into Watson was already in motion before that interview ever aired. The military moves slowly in some cases, but very quickly in others. It's possible that the timing is purely coincidental, but you cannot blame people for looking at this timeline and asking hard questions about whether the military is punishing this guy specifically for speaking out publicly against Trump. That question is not going away anytime soon. And honestly, Watson's case might end up becoming the defining example that shapes how this question gets answered going forward. Let's be real about how the military actually handles cases like this. Because it's not as simple as he criticized the president, so they threw him in a cell. Pretrial confinement in the military is not something that happens automatically just because someone is under investigation. There's usually a process behind it. A commander has to determine there's probable cause to believe an offense occurred. There's typically some finding that the person is either a flight risk, likely to obstruct the investigation, or likely to engage in further serious misconduct if left free. So the Air Force is not just saying they don't like what he said. They're pointing to allegations of continued misconduct, which suggests, at least according to their framing, that this isn't only about the CNN interview itself, but about a pattern of behavior they believe has kept happening. Now, is that framing accurate, or is it a convenient justification layered on top of what's really a retaliation move? Honestly, we don't fully know yet, and neither does anybody shouting about this online. That's exactly why the not yet formally charged detail matters so much. Until charges are filed, until we can actually see what specific conduct they're pointing to, this whole thing sits in a gray zone where reasonable people can look at the same facts and land in very different places. The more you dig into this story, the more layers you uncover. There's the personal story of Major Watson himself, a man who sacrificed everything for what he believed in. There's the legal story of military justice and how it operates in a system that doesn't always align with civilian notions of free speech. There's the political story of impeachment and the complicated math that makes it nearly impossible to actually remove a sitting president. And there's the constitutional story about the limits of executive power and the role of Congress in authorizing military action. All of these stories are running simultaneously, intersecting at the single point of Major Jason Watson standing on the Capitol steps with that sign. And that's what makes this story so compelling. It's not just about one thing, it's about everything. It's about the tension between military discipline and political speech. It's about the limits of presidential power in matters of war. It's about the impeachment process and whether it can actually function as a check on executive authority. It's about one man's willingness to sacrifice his career and his freedom for what he believes is right. All of these elements come together in this story in a way that feels almost like a movie, but it's real. This is actually happening right now in America. An active duty Air Force major is sitting in pretrial confinement because he stood up in uniform and called for the impeachment of his commander-in-chief. Whatever you think about Trump, whatever you think about the Iran war, whatever you think about how much political speech a service member should be allowed, this case is going to set some kind of precedent. It's going to shape how future officers think about whether they can speak out, and it's going to shape how the public understands the line between legitimate military discipline and political retaliation dressed up as discipline. That is a genuinely important question, way bigger than just one guy's court-martial. So pay attention to this one because it is far from over. And whichever way it goes, it is going to tell us something real about where this country stands right now. The story of Major Jason Watson is still being written. We don't know how it ends yet. Will he be formally charged under Articles 88 and 92? Will he face a court-martial that could end his military career and potentially send him to prison? Or will the military back down in the face of public pressure and scrutiny? These are all open questions right now, and the answers will have ripple effects throughout the military and the broader political landscape. Think about the message that this sends to other service members. If you're an active duty officer watching this unfold, what are you learning? Are you learning that speaking out against the commander-in-chief will get you locked up, regardless of the constitutional merits of your concerns? Or are you learning that the military justice system still operates according to established rules and procedures, and that Watson's confinement is justified based on legitimate violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice? The answer to that question depends largely on what you believe about the facts of this case, and the facts are still emerging. One thing is certain, though. The Iran war debate is not slowing down. The questions about whether Congress authorized the conflict, whether the president has overstepped his constitutional authority, whether military action in Iran is justified at all, these questions are not going away. And stories like Watson's are exactly what could eventually push these questions from talk into action. Because every time someone like Jason Watson makes a public stand, it reminds the American people that there are real human beings behind the abstract policy debates. Real officers who might be ordered to fight. Real families that might be impacted by decisions made in Washington. Real people who are willing to sacrifice everything for what they believe is right. Now, here's the part of the story that often gets lost in the shuffle. The impeachment conversation, even if it's not happening on any official calendar right now, is clearly simmering under the surface. Democrats have been discussing the possibility of pursuing impeachment if they retake control of Congress. That's a real conversation happening in political circles. But the math is brutal. A 2/3 vote in the Senate is almost impossible to achieve in the current political climate. Even if the House were to vote for impeachment, removing Trump from office would require bipartisan Senate support that simply doesn't exist right now. So what we're left with is a political stalemate wrapped in a military justice drama surrounded by constitutional questions. It's messy, it's complicated, and it's exactly the kind of story that tends to get flattened online into something way simpler than it actually is. You'll see clips that make it sound like Trump is basically on the verge of getting removed from office any day now. And you'll see other clips trying to make Watson sound like some kind of criminal who deserves whatever happens to him. Neither one of those framings is honest, and neither one of those framings is what the actual documented facts support. What we actually know, confirmed across multiple outlets, is this. An active duty officer publicly broke with his commander-in-chief over a war policy. He did it in uniform, he did it on national television, and within a day of that interview airing, he ended up locked up pending investigation with no formal charges filed yet, as of the most recent reporting. That's the real story. Not more, not less. And honestly, that's exactly the kind of story that deserves careful, honest coverage instead of wild speculation in either direction. Let's sit with that for a moment. Watson hasn't been formally charged yet. That means we don't fully know how serious this could get for him. The Iran war debate is not slowing down. And this whole conversation about impeachment, even if it's not happening on any calendar right now, is clearly simmering under the surface. Stories like this one are exactly what could eventually push it from talk into action. And we're going to keep following this one closely. Because trust me, this is not the last you're going to hear about Jason Watson, or about how far this administration is willing to go to control the narrative around its own war policy. One more thing worth sitting with before we wrap up here. Stories like this one tend to get flattened online into something way simpler than they actually are. You'll see clips that make it sound like Trump is basically on the verge of getting removed from office any day now. And you'll see other clips trying to make Watson sound like some kind of criminal who deserves whatever happens to him. Neither one of those framings is honest, and neither one of those framings is what the actual documented facts support. What we actually know, confirmed across multiple outlets, is this. An active duty officer publicly broke with his commander-in-chief over a war policy. He did it in uniform, he did it on national television, and within a day of that interview airing, he ended up locked up pending investigation with no formal charges filed yet, as of the most recent reporting. That's the real story. Not more, not less. And honestly, that's exactly the kind of story that deserves careful, honest coverage instead of wild speculation in either direction. Because whatever you personally think about Trump, whatever you personally think about the Iran war, whatever you personally think about how much political speech a service member should be allowed, this case is going to set some kind of precedent. It's going to shape how future officers think about whether they can speak out. And it's going to shape how the public understands the line between legitimate military discipline and political retaliation dressed up as discipline. That is a genuinely important question, way bigger than just one guy's court-martial. So pay attention to this one because it is far from over. And whichever way it goes, it is going to tell us something real about where this country stands right now. So let's recap where things actually stand today. In simple terms, Jason Watson protested in uniform at the Capitol, calling for Trump and Vance to be impeached over the Iran war. He got arrested. He gave a fiery CNN interview accusing Trump of violating the Constitution. One day later, he was placed in pretrial confinement with no formal charges filed yet as of this recording. His lawyer expects possible charges under Articles 88 and 92 of military law, a completely separate track from congressional impeachment. And actual impeachment needs a House majority plus 2/3 of the Senate to remove a president, a bar that has not been cleared in this case, and based on current reporting is not close to being cleared right now. That's the real verified state of this story today. Everything beyond that is speculation, and we'll keep bringing you the facts as they actually develop, not the wild version flying around social media. Stick with us because this story is moving fast and there's a lot more to come. The next update on this could come fast, and when it does, you'll want to be here to understand what's really happening. This is a story about one man's courage, one man's sacrifice, and one man's decision to put everything on the line for what he believes. It's a story about the tension between military discipline and political speech. It's a story about the limits of presidential power and the role of Congress in authorizing war. It's a story that touches on the most fundamental questions of American democracy. Major Watson remains in confinement, impeachment talks continue, and the Iran war persists, all threads still in motion. The story is far from over and will shape American politics and military policy for years.